Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Council Chambers on this beautiful February 14th. Again, if you look outside, it is almost spring out there. Almost, and not quite yet. I think the weather's playing some tricks on us. It is still the middle of winter, but it feels like spring. And also being February the 14th, it is Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be our Valentine and joining us here tonight with Council and the members that are watching. I'm pretty sure there's better places and better people like you spend the day with instead of with members of Council, but we appreciate you being here. Before we get started, I just want to make acknowledgement. We do have a local hometown lady that was participating in the Winter Olympics by the name of Christina de Bruin, and she finished with the bronze medalist in the monobob, which is a great accomplishment in terms of how many people had the opportunity to participate in the Olympics, never mind to be able to medal. So that's a great accomplishment for a local girl, which is now, I believe she's residing in Calgary at the current time, but if you see any of her family around, make sure you send them congratulations. Okay, with that, Deputy Mayor, motion to adopt the agenda, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I make a motion to adopt the regular council meeting agenda for Monday, February 14th, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to public input session. Administration, has anybody registered to speak at public input session?
Good evening, Your Worship. No, we've had no pre-registrations this evening.
Okay. Thank you. And the public input sessions is the time that Council allows any individual of our community to speak and address Council on any item that's not on the current agenda. Is anybody in the chambers like to speak to Council? Okay, see none. Moving on to number 4 of our agenda, which is presentations and delegations. We have none tonight. And also number 5 for statutory public hearings, we don't have any either. Moving on to number 6, which is the adoption of council minutes. Councillor Hansard.
Your Worship, I move that council approve the regular council meeting minutes of January 24, 2022. Is that the right date?
That's correct.
I've got, okay. And February 7th, 2022, Governance and Priorities meeting minutes as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Hansard. Members of Council, you had a chance to read the minutes. Any errors or omissions? Okay, see none. I didn't either, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. Okay, moving on to number 7, adoption of Council Board's committee minutes. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Town Council accept the Council Boards and Committee meeting minutes for information.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. So members of Council, there is 5 minutes of boards and commissions to consider. Have you had a chance to read it? Any questions or comments just in general or to the board appointees? Okay, see none. Call the question. All those in favor? Thank you, and that's carried. Move to number 8, which is bylaws. And today we have 1, which is the land use bylaw, first reading. Go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Tonight we come before Council requesting first reading to revisions to the land use bylaw. In a minute, I will introduce Mr. Justin Young, our development supervisor, who along with Mr. Dibble will make a short presentation and then be available to answer questions. The changes to the LUB follow Council's recent acceptance of the housing strategy, specifically Goal 2, which is to improve access to and choice of market housing. The 2021 Development Activity Report, which was presented to Council 1 week ago, showed the town has issued relatively moderate level of new residential dwelling units in each of the last 6 years. To be clear, the town is not immune to economic forces regionally and provincially, and there's no silver bullet to achieve higher growth levels. One of the tools in Council's toolbox to enable growth are the land use regulations. The proposed changes are intended to encourage growth while maintaining Council's long-term vision of the community. It is recommended that Council give the bylaw first reading today, to put the bylaw on the table so that the community input may be received and considered prior to second and third readings later in April. I will now turn it over to Mr. Young for his presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Good evening, everybody. So as Ian noted, here today to discuss Land Use Bylaw 2654 LOU 22, which serves as the beginning of the housing strategy implementation and also contains an administrative update. So just a couple things to note, major milestones of last year. In 2021, administration completed the first Land Use Bylaw administrative update. And later in that year, there was some canvas amendments with regards to proximity distances. And earlier this year, the Stony Plain Housing Strategy was accepted by Council, which brings us to the Housing Strategy Implementation and Administrative Update that we're currently here to discuss. It is also the intent moving forward of the Planning and Development Department to do yearly administrative updates. And this would help us essentially provide a vehicle for different strategic implementations. And it also provides Council some foresight to know when land use bylaw updates are coming. So to discuss some of the major changes which are in this bylaw. As Ian noted, the biggest changes are being made with the intent to implement goal number 2 of policy 4 of the housing strategy. Specifically, policy 4 speaks to the implementation of narrow lots in the land use bylaw. Additionally, zero lot line development has been provided as a general regulation. Again, seeks to achieve goal 2 policy 4 of the housing strategy. A new definition has been introduced. This is called Earthworks and includes activities to do with removal, grading, stockpiling. And just to note that while this definition is being introduced, it would not include activities which are implicit for legal developments. So say you have a permit to build a house, you don't need a permit to dig the foundation as well. There are also some administrative updates that included clarification and alignment of some terms, spelling and grammar corrections. The map has also been updated, but only with line corrections. There's no redistricting at this time. So these changes were discussed with both the Urban Developers Institute and the Canadian Home Builders Association. They've had an opportunity to comment as well as a follow-up meeting to discuss some of their input, and some of this has been captured and did affect the bylaw as it's currently written. So to discuss one of the more impactful changes to the land use bylaw, being narrow lot lists. Again, to reiterate, this achieves goal 2 policy 4 of the housing strategy and begins the implementation of that strategy. It will allow to provide for more variety in housing form. We do also see greater efficiency in municipal servicing as a result of this densification. And while these narrow lot lists are being proposed, administration wants to be sensitive to some of the challenges that can occur. And they have been done with the thought of maintaining on-street parking to be available in between 2 driveways, so there's enough space for a car to fit. Off-street parking requirements have not changed at this time, so there is still the requirement to provide 2 parking spaces on site for the vast majority of residential uses. And this densification also results in a improved access to market for home buyers through cost. Zero lot lines again seek to achieve the same goal, which is goal 2 of policy 4 of the housing strategy. And we were as well conscious in creating the zero lot line regulation to attempt to mitigate some of those typical challenges that are seen. So the way it is currently written, zero lot line developments could not face each other. So this has the advantage of mitigating some of those parking concerns that we see. We have limited it to only the detached dwelling housing form. In all cases, there will be mandatory maintenance easements that would allow for access to, perhaps paint the side of the house or any kind of maintenance that might be required for the homeowner. This would see us align more closely with our regional partners and jurisdictions. We provided 2 options for builders with regards to zero lot line developments, being a 1.5 meter distance between 2 buildings or a 2.4. And again, this creates some improved access to market for home buyers And I'll also note that this was created as a general regulation, which applies to the R2, R4, R5, and R6B districts. And so this is just a discussion of what has come to pass and where we're moving. So we did initial engagement in January. We are here today to discuss first reading, and we would be looking for the April 11th date to advertise for a public hearing. And then, as I stated, the intent moving forward would be that we do adopt a yearly process of land use bylaw administrative updates. I'm going to pass it over to Miles Dibble to just discuss some of the items that came up last week during the discussion with UDI. I apologize that these next two slides were not included in the package, but we did want to make sure that we continue that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Young. As can be shown here on the screen here, I just want to also mention that part of our intent here is to provide some additional background information. This will enable a better discussion during the public hearing and the discussion that will take place at the second reading and third reading. Again, this is kind of more information purposes relevant for a first reading discussion. So in front of you here, we've got the various items or development types that was proposed or indicated and discussed by the UDI representative last week, including narrower or compact housing, reduced setbacks / zero lot lines, fee simple multi-unit housing, secondary suites, and front park facing housing. In terms of how these different types of housing interact with the LUB, in terms of the narrower or compact, the proposed LUB amendment would decrease some lot widths, specifically in the R2, R4, R5, and R6, option B districts. In terms of the reduced setbacks and zero lot lines, this is being introduced as a new general section regulation. Specifically, as mentioned earlier by Mr. Young, there's a 1.5 and a 2.5 setbacks. More specifically, for those that are familiar with the high intensity fire regulations and some of the implications of those, the 2.4 meter zero lot line is intended to allow windows specifically and additional forms of standard product. It doesn't necessarily change the frontage of a street, but it enables each individual dwelling to be located adjacent to their property line, therefore allowing windows on the other side of the building, which is currently not allowed given the fire regulations in Stony Plain. The 1.5 meter side yard is more the traditional one you're seeing in other municipalities that allows for a slightly smaller lot and enables better servicing potential, and again, just kind of increases that density along a block, but has more concerns in certain regards, more constraints on the sites. Another way to look at the fee simple multi-unit housing, I know that was introduced by UDI last week, is it's really semi-detached and row housing on a fee simple style. Again, just to reiterate, the town does have these presently in the R4, R5, R6, R8, as well as the C3 districts. So these are not necessarily new, but just the further promotion of those. In terms of the secondary suites, again, we'll continue to allow these. Stony Plain has been kind of a regional example of a little more flexibility in terms of how we deal with secondary suites. As just for interest, other municipalities often define secondary suites in terms of basement secondary suites, lane secondary suites, and so forth. Our land use bylaw doesn't necessarily discriminate, I guess you could say, about the type. We have specific regulations according to how they are, but if it says you're allowed a secondary suite, you can have it any form on a lot that enables it based upon the regulations accordingly. And again, those are available in the R1, 2, 4, 8, as well as the C3 and the FD districts. In terms of the park fronting homes, these are somewhat relatively new, and I would say the main difference is a reduced front yard setback in terms of a lot width. Again, these are a little more unique. I think as the UDI representative indicated, they're kind of a niche area and very dependent upon park space being nearby. So we have enabled them with the recommendations before you in the R6 option B district. But again, there's some additional criteria there that might limit where they're allowed. But again, administration sees this as a viable option. In terms of the next slide, based on the conversation that took place last week, we wanted to address 3 additional items. Specific bungalow housing. I know this was a main topic that was discussed by council. For clarity, it is allowed in all districts. There's nothing that necessarily prohibits bungalows from being developed on any place where, say, for example, a 2-story building has been built. From some additional research that we did with UDI, we actually looked at 3 different neighborhoods in Stony Plain, and I know there was some question about what percentage, for example, bungalows are in some of our fee simple neighborhoods, and it was less than 4%. So just to give an idea, these are all lots that builders or landowners or future residents have the opportunity to choose whether it's a bungalow or 2-story home. And in this case, over the last approximately 10 years for these 3 neighborhoods, only 4% of those lots have been built as bungalows, just to give council a number in that case. In terms of site coverage, there was some conversation about whether additional site coverage is needed for certain districts. In terms of what administration has reviewed with our land development industry, the only change is to internal row house units, and that was made as a recommendation when we consulted with the industry. The industry recommended that we increase it, and administration agreed with that, so we did have that as a change. That's specifically, I believe, in the R6, but I'd have to double check on that to be sure. Any of the other areas that might have additional lot coverage or site coverage requirements, typically for something like this, administration would monitor the trends going forth. So for example, with our secondary suites, over the course of 2 to 3 years, we monitored how appeals went for any variances that were required or any discretionary uses, such as secondary suites. And after 2 to 3 years of noticing that the appeals were upheld and there was no concerns with that from the community standpoint, that's why last year we recommended that all secondary suites go from a discretionary to a permitted use, because it was something that we monitored and trended and tracked. So in a similar vein, if there are any concerns with the site coverage, one of the reasons we're not increasing any of those at this time is we wanted to see if there's any variances needed. Again, this is something within the realm of a development officer being able to grant a variance for, and it's something that we would track and monitor, and if needed, we could increase this and recommend that at a later LUB amendment. In terms of the third item, the 0 lot lines, just wanted to reiterate a little bit, I think, what was mentioned by Mr. McKay and Mr. Young, in the sense that, again, there's 2 separate types of 0 lot lines being recommended. Again, in one specific section under the general part of the bylaw. Again, if council wishes to have both continued or one of them, changes can be recommended during the public hearing. Specifically to remove one or more of those depending on council's wishes. And with that, I will leave it with council for any further questions you may have at this point. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Young and Mr. Dibble. Any other additional comments from administration? Okay, seeing none, members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Please, there's no motion on the table. It is just for clarity and understanding of the presentations. Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Mr. Dibble. It may end up going to General Manager McKay, but my question is this. It appeared to me that the presenter virtually at the last meeting indicated something that you seem to be repeating today, which is that only 4% of homes being built are built in subdivisions already, or 4%, because it is up to the individual developer whether or not they're going to put bungalows or 2 stories on properties. Unless they're going to build about 750 max square foot bungalows, which are very, very small, you can't build a bungalow the same size as a 2-story footprint. So the lot sizes have to be larger, or the setbacks have to be different. Is there a way to answer this issue so that the statement becomes then true? It would be up to the developer whether he's going to put bungalows or 2 stories on individual lots, because right now, I don't see how that can be true.
Excuse me, Your Worship, through to Councillor Hansard and the rest of the council. I have a few comments to make on that, and then I would open it up if the staff want to jump in as well. But I think our manager of planning had indicated, that when scanning neighborhoods, recent ones, I understand, the number of about 4%. At this point, Your Worship, through to council, I think. I'll speak on behalf of my staff. I think we would prefer to leave the answer as that's the facts on the ground. That's what's happened. There's a lot more that goes into that conversation. What do people want? What do people don't want? So on and so forth. I don't know that we could conclusively speak to that. We could certainly offer perspective and opinion, but I think that may come perhaps at a later time, or if directly asked, we could offer opinion. But I think at this point in time, it seems as though for what we have or what's in front of us or what is the regulations we have now, it would appear 4% of the market chooses bungalows for what I would expect a variety of reasons.
Clarification, Mr. Mayor. Am I understanding correctly that you're saying this report has to do with what's out there, not what may come in the future? Is that true?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Hansard and the rest of council, again, I'm just reiterating, as the manager of planning indicated, a scan of, as of today or up to this point, it appears that about 4% of our, what I would say, new market housing would be choosing bungalows. I don't know that we can comment factually, so to speak, as to why that is or why that is not, or what have you. What we can tell you is 4% choose that. I guess I would just reiterate that, if asked for a perspective or opinion, we could offer that. But that's what that would be. It would be an opinion of myself or my staff. And, that's fair at certain times, but I'll just stop there again, Your Worship. I'm not sure. I see the General Manager would like to comment as well.
Your Worship, just to supplement, I think the key point from the administrative point of view is the regulations permit bungalows everywhere there's basically a single detached house. So the market chooses what it does. We're not regulating against something. It's there in the regulations, and the market forces take that on.
Okay. Thank you. And can administration provide council the types of zoning where bungalows are allowed? R1, R2, R4, R5, and R6.
Through your worship, or to your worship, the zones that allow semi-detached as well as row housing are the R4, R5, R6, R8, and C3 districts.
Okay, I think we're talking about bungalows. So which zoning allows a developer or the owner of a lot to build a bungalow?
A bungalow would technically be allowed in all residential districts, R1 through R8, with the exception of R7. And they're predominantly within R1 and 2, with some being in R4 and 5.
Okay, thank you. So Councilor Hansard, that's so the question. I think you asked about bungalows and the ability to build bungalows. And in the zoning, it's allowed on every residential zoning except for R8, no, and R7. Go ahead.
You're speaking of where they're allowed is one thing. That's what the land use bylaw is that we're dealing with tonight. This has nothing to do with encouraging developers or builders when they come to planning, because there's no more municipal planning commission where people on that commission get to say, we really would like some more bungalows built in Stony. Does this leave it open for the planning department to encourage developers to build bungalows rather than, because somehow or another we need to meet the need, and the need is not reflective of what has been built because builders wouldn't build them. They cost more to build and took up more, they require more land than the normal lot. So I'm just trying to find out, we're going to be talking about a number of things in this land use bylaw that may be very, very different from what we've looked at before in Stony Plain. Is allowing it in a bylaw, setting up the opportunity for it, the same as encouraging it? Because if you just leave it up to the developers, they won't build them. But if the planning department has a way to say we would really like to have a certain percentage of lots prescribed for bungalows, that's a different ballgame because the planning department's sort of in the driver's seat there. So can that be done so that we can begin to answer the need that so many people express wanting to stay in Stony Plain or wanting to build in Stony Plain, but we don't have the type of housing they need for their physical needs?
Okay. So Councillor Hansford, again, the answer is yes. For your original question is if you see that there is a need for bungalows, and as answered by administrative staff, every residential zoning except for R7 allows the developer or the owner of the lot to build a bungalow.
Okay, so
your
then
question is, how do we incentivize?
Yes.
Right, that's a different conversation altogether.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of land use bylaw, the answer is yes. Anybody that has an R1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8 zoning can build a bungalow.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions and comments regarding the proposed presentation? Questions for clarity and understanding? Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do just have a couple of questions here. I'll start in regards to the parkfront housing that was spoken about a little bit there, and its allowance in the R6 zoning. Reading through under R6 option B, it talks about site coverage of 60% for an internal row, 50% for either a standalone or an end unit, with a 6-meter setback to an attached garage. My understanding when we were kind of looking at some of these in the presentation that we were provided was that it did not appear that there was anything close to a 6-meter setback on these. They were essentially a very narrow lot front to back due to the fact that they were built on a park, not requiring yard space. And with the garage, that would provide for the parking requirement under the bylaw. And so I'm just wondering, I know that there is the ability for the development officer to vary the regulations, but I'm just wondering how this 60% for an internal unit or 50% for a standalone compares to other land use bylaws, and if this is somewhat of a standard, or are we above or below?
Okay. Administration.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, in terms of looking at the specific product, administration has not looked specifically for this. It's just for clarity. When we looked at our lot coverage, the research we found is that we were in alignment generally with other land use bylaws, specifically for this sort of park amenity type housing. What we did is we enabled the area calculations and the lot widths to enable that type. Some of the other requirements regarding that may need to be varied depending on the circumstances of what is proposed. But we looked at this again, kind of taking that mentality of when we have a proposal there, the development officer has the ability to vary these regulations to enable whatever unique form is. We didn't want to reduce all the restrictions, but we wanted to enable it, especially specifically through, again, the lot width and the lot area. And again, when it comes to the lot coverage, it was something that we thought would be satisfactory at the time. And if needed, we could make that recommendation later on based on some actual applications that would come to us in the future.
Okay. And so sticking with that, through your worship, it speaks to front and flankage yard setbacks, minimum 3 meters from the principal building to the front lot line or the flankage lot line. I guess, given these lots, it would be interesting on what we would determine to be the front or the rear on them, but given that they're park front, we would like to jump. But as you go down further, we see rear yard setbacks, 5 meters to a deck or balcony. Is there a setback if this is a park-facing lot and they wanted a deck on the front side of their property, is there a required setback for that? Is that the same as your 3 meters? Or is it's 3 meters to the principal building and that entire 3 meters can be a deck? Is it because decks are mentioned in a rear yard, is now at the 5 meters? How does that work?
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, I believe this is a technicality that has not really been assessed, given, again, these are new forms of housing product that we have not seen. So these are the particularities that by giving a development officer the ability to regulate these, they would be able to interpret it accordingly and make sure that the appropriate variances are granted.
Okay, thank you. And then if I may, Your Worship? Go ahead. Excellent. You spoke a little bit, you touched on HERF in regards to zero lot line. Can you expand a little bit on how the town of Stony Plain is ensuring compliance with the high-density residential fire regulations while looking to introduce zero lot line? I'm just interested in knowing some of the challenges and how we've overcome them.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, there's a lot of complications and technicalities within this, so I'll try to keep it broad and high level. For the most part, due to the town's inability to reach the specific regulation under the fire code for the fire response time, given a specific percentage, I've currently failed to remember the exact numbers, but unable to not do that, basically the fire separation distance needs to be doubled or additional requirements need to be done during construction, such as things like sprinklers or certain fire barriers along the side walls. So in Stony Plain, for the most part, we would require doubling that distance, which is typically 1.2, I think is the normal number they use, which is why the 2.4 that is enabled by the additional side yard setback being 0 on one and 2.4 on the other enables, for example, a certain amount of openings on the sides or windows, in simple terms. So basically what this does is under the code, the lot line will be 2.4 meters away from one side of the building, therefore enabling certain windows, in essence, to be allowed on that side. On the other side, it would have to have certain restrictions in terms of, limiting the number of openings and what sort of material is on there. But it would get away from the requirement to have a sprinkler in particular for these sort of houses.
Excellent, thank you. So just for clarity, so it actually meets HERF by providing the 2.4 meters from the edge of the house to the property, or to the property line. We're just doing that on one side of the house instead of on both. And so there are specific regulations that apply on the side of the house that is on the property line. And then because of the compliance with HERF, we are now allowed to add windows, et cetera, to the side with the 2.4 meter setback.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, generally speaking, yes. Again, there's some nuances there that meeting the regulation, there's other parameters there that could affect under the code. As not being a safety code officer, I don't want to get into the nuances, but in essence, that is correct.
Yeah, so essentially, I guess, simply what I'm trying to understand in this is that we are proposing zero lot line and we are proposing zero lot line in compliance with HERF. We are not choosing zero lot line over HERF.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, I might rephrase that as there's two different types of zero lot lines being proposed. The 1.2 is what's typically done in other municipalities, whereas the 2.4 allows for your typical R2 block of houses with your typical 2.4 meter separation between buildings, which comes from the 1.2 on each side yard. And again, by shifting where each dwelling is on the lot, it enables windows on the 2.4 side.
Okay, thank you. And one more for me, Your Worship. Go ahead. Perfect. Staying on the topic of zero lot line. Obviously, it's proposed in this land use bylaw, and the way that it's proposed in this land use bylaw would allow for it, as you mentioned, in all of those specific zoning areas. Is there an opportunity in this land use bylaw, instead of kind of, I guess, carte blanching it and saying, you know, anywhere that's zoned this can have it, is there a way that we can state we will identify an area to trial zero lot lines within our community? So taking the specific area, whether it's the first developer to come to us to say, hey, you know, we'd like to do this, or whether we specify an area in our current area structure plans where we feel that this would be a good area to trial it. Is it something that we can put in essentially conditional, where we say we'd like to see this developed, we'd like to see it developed in this one area, and we would like to take some time to review how it performs, whether it does, you know, people do build there, whether it does meet the regulations, whether we have any challenges with homeowners, with residents, et cetera, with it? Is that something that's possible, or do we only have the option to include it completely or not include it at all?
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, it would be possible to do something like you describe. Some of the considerations is that you would have to have a developer decide where specifically they want it. So it does put up a little bit of additional red tape or kind of limitations in that case. There's some kind of middle grounds where you could say, for example, add a regulation to the zero lot line one that says there's, like, say, for example, a limitation on the percentage within the area of a neighborhood that would limit that, whereby, you know, you could, for example, say within an area structure plan, limit the percentage of dwellings within that area structure plan or the area of land within that is enabled or allowed for that. And it's something that administration could administer through the block plan process that's been set up within the district or within the section. But those are some ways, I guess. So it is possible, and those are some means. Again, there'd be some difficulties if you're sort of almost spot zoning what areas could be allowed. I know talking with the development industry, you know, they want to try it and experiment it and almost do what you're saying in some regards. But the more limitations you place on it might go from there. Okay, thank you.
And in theory then, just for clarity, you mentioned that they cannot be directly across the street from each other. Therefore, would it be fair to say that it is already limited to a maximum of 50%?
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, the limitation is only for those with front attached garages for that limitation. And I'd have to double check the specifics of the regulation regarding if there's anything further than that, but that's my recollection, is that the limitation is so that you don't have the reduction of on-street parking that front attached driveways create, therefore enabling at least one side to have public on-street parking, at least on one side, minus, you know, the fire hydrants and other implications.
Excellent, thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, I'm just going to continue on that line of questioning, because I think Councilor made a good question regarding the percentage of zero lot lines development in one area. And I think the answer from administration was, oh, yes, we could if we wanted to do that. But unless we build this into a bylaw, like this land use bylaw, then there is no stopping them. Because if it is approved for certain residential zoning, for example, if a subdivision is zone R2, which allows for zero lot lines, per se, then the whole subdivision can be zero lot lines. So I think Councilor Laurie is asking about, you know, is there a way that we can limit it for the time being, building into the bylaw where it says only 10% of each development can be zero lot lines, or 20%. I don't know what that number is. That's for council to have that conversation. But for us to actually limit the development, we actually have to build it into the bylaw.
Your worship, that would be correct, that if you do want to limit it directly, you would have to put it within the bylaw itself.
Okay, so we can't just leave it there and hope that the developers only build 10% or 15%.
They would be able to. I guess the one part I would add to that is that given the fact that it does require a block plan, any area that's currently zoned and subdivided out already would have very difficult time being able to do that for any of the areas that are currently done. So really this is something that would apply to new areas as they're rezoned and subdivided, or areas that have already rezoned and have not been subdivided yet, just for clarity.
Okay. Any more questions of clarity and understanding on the presentation? Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow along the line of thinking here related to the fire regulations, when we look at, sorry, let me back up for a second. You had mentioned other municipalities and how they're typically 1.2, 1.5 is what we see. My question there is, how many of those municipalities have like a part-time volunteer fire department? You know, when we look at the response, you know, when we're so close together for those homes, you know, do we have the capability with our current part-time fire department to ensure that it's safe, you know, for residents living in those zero lot line homes?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just going to jump in there. So again, Councillor Anderson, and just to add to the clarification of Councillor Lowry's questioning regarding HERF, it is safe. The question is, are they allowed to have side windows? Right? So without the side windows, then they can build within the regulations that are currently stipulated at 1.2 meters. If they want a side window, then that space has to be 2.4 meters for them to have side windows. So instead of having just windows in the front and the back of the property, because if a zero lot line, the one that's on the lot line will definitely have zero windows. On the other side, if they want side windows, which meets HERF, they have to be 2.4 meters setback from the property line. If they're not 2.4 meters setback, then they are still safe. They just can't have windows.
Right.
So in terms of asking the question, is it safe and our fire department can respond appropriately? Yes, they can.
Okay. Thank you for that. The other question I have is related to the materials, and so we talked about the difference in materials. You know, sprinklers were mentioned, that sort of thing. One of the reasons we've talked about going zero lot line is for the cost savings for the resident. And so I'm not a builder. I don't know the cost of these additional materials and sprinkler systems and those sorts of things. But, you know, will that negate the cost savings of building these zero lot line homes?
Through your worship to Councillor Anderson, I'm not completely aware on the specific costs. Again, those are up to the builders to understand and provide. I guess what I could provide is, my understanding is that there would be some savings, say on the servicing and long-term maintenance costs to the town in particular. In terms of what the cost would be to the homeowners, I'm not aware.
And just one last really quick here, just kind of a practical thing with what we've noticed with snow recently. As soon as we condense more homes into a smaller space, obviously we have need to find a place to put all the snow that's being shoveled away from these homes. And so I'm just wondering, in other communities, what they've done to mitigate that.
Through your worship to Councillor Anderson, unfortunately, again, I'm not aware. I don't know what the municipality has actually looked into, or administration has actually looked into snow clearing concerns with additional lots, but it's a good question to ask. Thank you.
Good question, Councillor Anderson. I'd like just to add on to that as well. If administration is looking for some answers on that, can you also add in, as you look at for the cost savings to build, if we go with zero lot lines or small and narrow lots, what is the cost the municipality to enforce in terms of snow clearing, street cleaning, neighbor disputes? We have a few subdivisions within the town right now that we've considered as a trial as a narrow lot duplexes and condominiums. We have a lot of issues in terms of clearing the snow, street cleaning, enforcement between the neighbors' disputes. how much does that cost extra on the town of Stony Plain versus having larger lots?
Your worship, I can maybe make a few comments on that. I'm not sure maybe the general manager would want to weigh in further, but your worship, I think, I don't know that we could provide hard data, on density levels versus, larger residential areas and so on and so forth. I think, to a degree, the linear meter will be the same, whether it's 4 lots or 8 lots, you're still, same surface areas and so on and so forth. If asked for a non-data answer, I think, traditionally we've seen, some operational challenges in higher density residential or detached or semi-detached streets, subdivisions, than we have in certain other areas. I don't know if we could quantify that without, to any, what I would say, reliable amount at this point in time, or reliable fact or detail on that. But I would say, and I would offer the opinion that, in certain ways, on certain aspects, some of the higher density development can be more of an operational challenge on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis from time to time. I'll just leave it at that, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I actually have a question. I'll just add another question here too, because since we're talking about the narrow lot widths and the 0 lot lines, in the proposed land use bylaw, there's a section in there where it says that there needs to be a swale that's maintained to allow water to flow away from the properties. We know swales are very important to take that surface water away from the property so they don't flood into the proper channels to get rid of the water. Having that written in there, who maintains that swale? We've had instances in the community, even on larger lots, where the swale is designed to be there, but somebody puts a flower bed, a shed, which blocks the swale. And a lot of times the town is not able to enforce them tearing down that shed or something. So how do we prevent that from happening in these narrow lots and 0 lot lines?
To Your Worship, specifically, one of the requirements is the drainage easement agreement that specifies that the landowner must maintain that for both their benefit as well as the other servient lot, and so the dominant and the servient lot both need to maintain the swale accordingly. So again, it would be up to the landowners to enforce that. Another aspect that's kind of unique with the 0 lot lines is that they do require the downspouts to be directed directly into a storm sewer. This therefore kind of mitigating some of the concerns that the additional water runoff in particular would have in this sort of a situation.
Okay. Councilor Blesh, what do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I'm going to refer to page 271 of 377, point 5. And it's very specific. All roof drainage from the dwelling, including an attached garage and general accessory development buildings, will be directed away from buildings and towards a public road, a lane, or a drainage feature such as a swale. So my question is, because I've read through this a couple of times and I have not been able to find it, are we setting a different standard for our drainage, our road infrastructure and whatnot, accepting more water? We already have a problem within our community of flooding that we're working towards, and yet we want to build developments today before we're finished with our swales and drainage that are going to add more water to our community. What is the town, where in here do I see that we either build more drainage ponds to hold this water for a shorter period of time, or we have this put somewhere in our system that it's able to hold it? Because we see on several occasions our creeks that flood drastically in our community, and yet we're talking about putting way more water in it and having it directed to our roadways, which we've talked about trying to get it away. And we also talk about the environment and having that water sit on our lots to help mitigate the flooding problems we have within our community.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Paletzko. So the stormwater is being handled in the same way as it would in any neighborhood. The water will be directed into the town system. The town system will be designed and sized appropriately. Some of the concerns you're referencing are older neighborhoods who precede some of the modern sizing and structures that have been designed to handle them. So the water from the houses and the yards will flow from private property to public property, and it will be transferred to the town system, the same as it does in every new neighborhood we have today. They will be sized to handle the amount of water coming off the private properties and other public properties, and then go into storm systems as appropriate. So there is no concern about handling more water.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions for clear understanding? Go ahead, Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship, and actually it's more so a comment for clarity, just in response to Councillor Anderson was asking about the increased cost for things like sprinkler systems and those type of things. However, when we're actually looking at the development that's being done and what's being proposed, this is being proposed so that sprinklers are not required, not so they are required. So the way our current land use bylaw works with the current setbacks we have, again, you can build within 1.5 meters of the property line on either side of that property line, but in order to have windows and to be compliant with HERF, you would require a sprinkler system. However, the way this is being proposed, it is being proposed so that you can now build that dwelling with a 2.4 meter setback, which then does not require the sprinkler system, which then does not require the extra expense. This proposal is being done to make this more affordable. Right now, builders have the ability to build houses close together in the town of Stony Plain. That exists, and there are several subdivisions where it has been done, where every second house has a sprinkler system in it in order to be compliant with the HERF regulations. This is another aspect of being compliant. This is another way to look at it, another way to do it, that we don't do it currently in our community, that will allow for it. Hence why the one side of the building cannot have any impingement opportunity in the likes of windows, etc., but the other side can, because it has that specified distance from the lot line. So when we're talking about the extra costs, this is a way to do this without adding extra costs. You can do it in other ways with adding the extra costs in our community today, but it makes it more expensive. Personally, I'd love to build a home with a sprinkler system in it. I'd love to provide that protection to the family because frankly, the way our homes are built today is more dangerous than anything. The materials that our carpets, our furniture, etc. are constructed are more dangerous than anything. And having a sprinkler system in your home is one of the surefire ways to help save your family. However, we're doing this so that it's not a requirement, whereas currently it is a requirement if we wanted to build houses closer together.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Laurie. Question to administration, because I have that written in my notes, and since Councillor already brought it up in terms of building materials. We know Safety Alberta or all those construction sites are doing testing in different types of window siding, etc., to allow it to meet the fire requirements to have windows even without the necessary 1.2 meter separation on both sides of the property line. Is that something that's going to be built into this land use bylaw, stipulating that we can approve these building materials if somebody wants to have side windows without meeting the 2.4 meter setback, but only 1.5 meter setback?
To your worship, the Safety Code Act is where the regulations regarding the HERF and the fire code are listed. So in terms of the land use bylaw regulations, they kind of complement or supplement the safety code. In terms of the different types of material, different alternatives to windows or different types of windows that may be approved to meet some of these requirements under the Safety Codes Act, they're separate from what's required under the LUB here. And again, it's two separate regulatory systems of which both need to be met for a house to be built in Stony Plain.
Okay, Council, any more questions for clarity and understanding? Go ahead. Go ahead, Councilor Hansard.
We're here tonight to pass first reading only on this land use bylaw. That will allow us to bring it to the public for public input, public hearing, and all of that, correct?
That is correct.
There are certain questions being asked tonight that we don't have answers for. And I'm not laying fault, I'm just saying we don't have answers for them. So would it be in a future meeting that we would be able to have that administration to come back to us with answers? I can't remember the questions, but Mr. Dibble commented twice that I think when asked a question that he didn't have those answers, but we will want them. And we're not here to really debate anything, but I'm wondering, there are other implications, for instance, in using sprinkler systems in homes. When we talk about cost savings on zero lot lines, you can add $4,000 to $12,000 for a sprinkler system. And one of the other implications many people don't realize they get into is if you go away, your insurance will not cover any damage if you don't have somebody coming in to check on your home every day. If you do and something happens, your insurance will not pay out for damages. And so, I mean, that's a cost to homeowners as well, but we're not talking about it here at land use bylaw and development. And that can happen to anybody, okay? I mean, it's not just small lot or zero lot line homes. That can happen to anybody. But when we're talking about one of the reasons to do it is because it's a cost savings, there are other costs. And so I think we need maybe a little more information provided. Maybe some of us need to do our own research so we can come with our own best questions and arguments for or against this land use bylaw change, particularly on zero lot lines. I can remember people saying, what was council thinking when we approved Brookview over by the hospital? And yet the people in Brookview seem to love their neighborhood, but it has some issues like every neighborhood. So what will be the opportunity for these to be brought forward without finding ourselves sitting in another meeting where now we're expected to pass second and third reading, unanimous consent, and boom, we've got a brand new land use bylaw we're going to live with for several years, and we haven't really gotten answers or explored some of these other things. How does that happen? Could you please brief us and let the public who's watching online know?
Thank you, Councilor Hansard. So the questions that were asked to administration, I'm looking at administration, they'll be, as they do in the past, come prepared to answer those questions for us. And sometimes they even present them during their presentation at the public hearing for bylaw. And at that time, if members of council are not satisfied, council can defer the motion, table the motion, or if it's just a good old conversation and debate, if it passes, it passes, regardless if you're on the winning side or the losing side of the argument. It is what it is. Councilor Hansard.
Yeah, Your Worship, if I could just quickly reiterate, absolutely support the comment about administration. We're here with our ears open. We're trying to hear those questions and, to be prepared to come back, whether in written form or verbal, at the public hearing session to provide some answers or at least some further information along those lines. And some of the more specific building questions as well. Although I can't, I would presume, or maybe I shouldn't, but I would presume that some people, representatives from the building industry, may be present at the public hearing that could speak a little more directly to, building costs and so on and so forth than perhaps we could.
Thank you. Any more questions for clear and understanding? Okay. To administration, I think during the presentation, there was 5 kind of highlights that would be changing on this land use bylaw if we go through public hearing and council approves it. At what state does it change enough to hold another public hearing? For example, there's 5 recommended changes. One is the narrow lot lines, or narrow width, zero development, zero lot lines, some new definitions in there, I don't see a problem, administrative updates, and mapping. Those are the 5 highlighted issues that will be changing in this land use bylaw versus the previous one. For example, if council changes and strikes 3 of those changes out, does that constitute a new public hearing because of the changes, or is it just significant to have those 3 and continue to pass the bylaw as amended?
Your worship, certainly appreciate that question. It comes up both in the chambers and does come up from the public from time to time. I know I have a perspective on that, but I'll also ask our manager of planning to weigh in on any specifics he may have. Your worship, in the past, on that specific question, that particular question on what triggers it going back to a public hearing, I think it's incumbent upon members of council, myself, to really go with a bit of an ethic check there. Did we substantially alter something? You know, what's the definition of substantial? I think we can often feel that in our own instinct as public servants, that if it's a fairly significant change, we need to be back into the public hearing. So I think there's a little bit of art, not as much science to that from my perspective, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Dibble to reaffirm that there may be some science as well as to what triggers that going back to a public hearing.
To your worship, to supplement the town manager, one of the intentions administration did with this bylaw is we sort of took a more liberal approach in the sense that we've proposed alterations kind of among all those different types, with the intention that if council wanted to pull back, say for example, on any one of them, the public hearing has been scheduled with all of those being active. So if council wants to deactivate them, if you want to look at it that way, they've all been open for discussion, and that's kind of the intention, the approach that we took intentionally. Thank you.
Okay. Well, before we go on there, I had just highlighted this. I asked a question regarding the swales, and the administration kind of answered saying that it will be registered on title, so therefore the property owner that actually has that title and has to maintain it. Even knowing that some of the subdivisions that we deal with right now, there's quite a few in the town of Stony Plain, even though it's registered on title of where current swale goes to a drain, a property owner downstream from that has prevented the water from going there. And to date, many years later, the town has not been able to rectify it, even though it is registered on title. So my question goes back, how do we enforce it? If an owner decides just to block it up, and we can say what's registered, please take care of it, and they don't, where do we go from there?
To your worship and the manager of planning, perhaps I could chime in on that one. Seeing as how it will be written into the land use bylaw as a regulation, it would be enforceable under that land use bylaw by a peace officer.
Okay. So we currently do have the resources to enforce that?
Your worship, to supplement, we have some other tools which administration could look at in the future as well in relation to lot grading and drainage on properties, and our ability to enforce easements and drainage considerations. Currently, we do not have such a tool, but if it was something the town was heading down, we would certainly look at those opportunities in the future, and the various resource requirements which would be necessary, because drainage is an area of conflict, and enforcement is challenging under the current situation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Pletchko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. To administration, page 247 of 377. Why, for clarification, why are we moving from 1 year to 2 years for a lot grading process? And is that common in other municipalities today?
Your worship, to Councillor Pletchko, there's been several incidences where a permit will expire often after 1 year once work is done. So there's been implications where the landscaping being kind of the last portion of the development permit that's done takes more than that initial year that it, typically a development permit's going to expire at. So we do this kind of as a preventative thing. Instead of having to reissue a permit, this way landscaping has been the number one thing that's caused us to extend a development permit approval. So this way we're just kind of mitigating some of that kind of bureaucracy. It's a little bit of a red tape reduction was the intent here, is that we don't see any harm or foul in this sort of a move. Therefore, by just extending an extra year, it enables that without us having to do any additional paperwork.
All right. Any other questions of clarity and understanding? See none. Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that Town Council give first reading to Land Use Bylaw 2654/LUO/22, and number 2, authorize administration to proceed with newspaper advertising and notification of a public hearing to be held on April 11th, 2022 for Bylaw 2654/LUO/22.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Laurie. Members of council, any questions, comments, and debate on the proposed motion? Again, this is for first reading, and then with that, administration will go advertise, and then we'll seek feedback from the business development industry, UDI, Canadian Building Housing Association of the Edmonton region, and also our residents. Questions, debate on the motion? Okay, see none, I'll call question. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Moving on to business items 9.1, the environmental portfolio annual progress update. Go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm excited to bring you the first environmental portfolio annual update. Again, last year we brought forth and had accepted by council a new environmental master plan, a renewed environmental stewardship strategy, and as part of that stewardship strategy, this annual portfolio is to be presented to council. So in terms of my presentation here, we've got 3 sections: establishing the framework, just a little quick background on the environmental master plan, especially given there's some new members of council. I just want to give a little review on it. This is followed by the second section, which again is creating the action plan, the environmental stewardship strategy, and then getting into what the bulk of this presentation is about, beginning to track and report on our actions, the environmental portfolio annual update. So just for some high-level context, the town has the Municipal Development Plan, or MDP, which guides sustainable growth and development in Stony Plain and includes policies that address all aspects of sustainability. One of those is an environmental theme, and that's really the catalyst for the environmental master plan, which captures Stony Plain's environmental priorities as outlined in the MDP and hones in on the environmental aspect of sustainability in particular. And then the environmental stewardship strategy is more of a living document that contains goals and actions for Stony Plain to achieve the vision of both the MDP and the EMP. Again, the Environmental Master Plan is a comprehensive plan that establishes an updated environmental framework to guide actions related to environmental responsibility. It includes a vision, as shown here on the bottom left, has 5 themes: energy, land, air, water, waste, and has various policies under that. And again, the intention of this is more of a long-term plan, one that would have, kind of at least a 5 to 10 year life cycle that looks kind of at that 20 to 30 years out. In terms of the environmental stewardship strategy, it's more of an implementation plan or strategy again that outlines the town's environmental portfolio, defines actionable initiatives, and really progresses the environmental framework. Specifically, again, it defines the portfolio, it acknowledges, and again, this was part of the work that was done last year, was really looking and actually tracking and compiling all of the different town initiatives that have sort of an environmental aspect to them. So again, it did define those as completed, ongoing, and future initiatives. Specifically, to kind of focus our work in the environmental portfolio, we're looking at a 5-phase action plan which has really created that way to give flexibility in terms of, say, prioritization, resource funding, and that sort of things towards these initiatives so that they can be done in sort of an orderly fashion. And then again, it creates the annual reporting requirements, which is what this presentation is about. In terms of the environmental stewardship strategy, it followed the same 5 themes that were indicated in the master plan: energy, land, air, water, and waste. Specifically in terms of those different initiative types, the environmental portfolio contains ongoing initiatives, which are those such as Arbor Day, rain barrel sale, those that are continually part of our operations and our general events. One of the things that was unique about the environmental stewardship strategy is it set forth all those completed initiatives to kind of acknowledge what we have done in the past. It then set up the action plan itself, noted external initiatives that are trying to address some of the things we're working on here, but are really done at a regional or even a provincial or federal level, and then noted those that are kind of beyond the action plan, that again, there was merit when we were doing our research towards something, but something that for whatever reason we didn't think it made sense to put in the action plan itself and was not being done at the external level. So again, in certain of those ongoing initiatives, I'm not going to read them all here, but they're just listed on the slide, broken down again by the 5 different themes. Then the action plan itself, again, 5 different phases, touched on 4 of the different types of themes, and again, had some information regarding which ones, for example, required some corporate funding through the corporate plan, or could be done by a student, for example, that we usually have. We've had a couple last year, and we've got one coming in this year here. And then specifically in terms of setting up the annual reporting and update, so it specified new, ongoing, and future initiatives and their related goals, tracking the environmental initiatives, and again, the intention of the ESS is that it would be updated every kind of 3 to 5 years to make sure that action plan stayed new and current. So in terms of the portfolio update for 2021, it has an updated summary table for the 2021 status of each of these initiatives. It proposed 3 new initiatives that have been added to the action plan. It addresses the ongoing initiatives, status update by theme, and then quick updates on the action plan, external, and beyond action plan initiatives. So the 3 new initiatives, and these come out of some questions, I guess, last year from council, as well as just some ongoing initiatives when we kind of look at what's next from a long-range planning perspective. So the Clean Energy Improvement Program, there was some discussion about this last year, I believe, in council. So we looked into it, and the program details, we did research on this last year. In essence, it's a provincially led program that allows municipalities to front-end renewable and energy-efficient upgrades for residences and commercial landowners. It would acquire a bylaw to be set up for the funding arrangements, and the costs would be recouped via property tax payments over a 20 to 25-year plan, or 25-year kind of payment plan, similar to, if anyone's familiar, if there's like a local improvement, say for example, they pave a laneway that was previously gravel, that's something that each resident along there would have to initially pay an upfront cost, or could enter into a sort of a long-term plan to pay that via their taxes over a portion of years with some additional interest added in. So again, that's one of the main ones that we looked into. The other 2 are the Green Space Plan and the Parks and Open Space Guidelines. These come about kind of a renewed focus now that we've got some of the other topics, housing, agriculture, are kind of being done right now. We're looking back at I think it was 2018 was when the Parks and Open Space Master Plan was done, and there hasn't been too much work on that portfolio, so we started looking at that kind of from a planning perspective and really realized from the land perspective of the environmental portfolio, it kind of rings bell there. So we've added it as the 2 there, one of which, in terms of the Green Space Plan, is to be done by a sustainability scholar starting this summer. In terms of the Parks and Open Space Guidelines, it's something that's being worked on by administration, and really the intention of those guidelines is to guide and make sure that when we do have dedications of, say, for example, municipal reserve, that we do that in a coordinated fashion that's in the best interest of the town. Again, this is a process that's sometimes influenced quite heavily by developers when we get into that. And again, this ties together area structure plan down to the subdivision phase. And really these guidelines will provide some guidance to administration in terms of how we get that done. In terms of a quick status update on the ongoing initiatives, in the energy area, the Trails Solar Lighting Program was launched 9 years ago, has installed 25 lights so far, and we're looking at how to, I guess, get lights that are better suited for our climate. I'll just kind of sum it up like that. In terms of the land, there was 18 trees planted in Southridge during the Arbor Day celebrations, and the town continues to work on the urban agricultural plan, which is slated to be completed in approximately 3 months here. From an air perspective, the community peace officers have responded to 19 concerns related to air pollution. The rainwater collection at Heritage Park continues to be used for water flowering, and groundwater from the dewatering well continues to be used for our community skating rinks. And from a waste perspective, 53% of the waste diversion took place last year, and 1,080 volunteers actually helped during the pitch-in week, which I thought was quite a good number to save for a small town, or a large town like we are, but with our population. In terms of the overall updates, 6 initiatives have been started, including the 2 new ones in phase 1, and 1 initiative has been started in phase 2. One of which in particular is the environmental initiative for the webpage to be updated with environmental information. So this is currently, later this month, we'll be updating our website with some additional environmental initiative information. Also, the the municipal energy consumption data has been gathered over this last year, and is some of the initial work to support the energy manager, the municipal energy manager position that's going to be hired in the next couple months here. They'll be looking through that data and then proposing energy efficiency upgrades to municipal facilities. And then solar infrastructure has been looked at, for example, for the future operations building that's being explored right now. In terms of external initiatives, most of the work has been done kind of in the waste portfolios. Also to note, the MRB has started an Environment, Social, and Governance Technical Committee, which is looking at sort of how do we better situate ourselves as a region in terms of the effects of climate change and sort of natural disasters and other mitigation and adaptation measures. And then in terms of the Beyond Action Plan initiatives, the main one that's being worked on is the Urban Agricultural Plan, and that's exploring the feasibility of different types of urban agriculture. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding of the presentation? Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, first of all, the color coding spoke to my color-coded heart. I love it because it makes everything just fall into the right places, and I can very easily keep my mind on what it is I'm actually looking at. So thank you very much for that. I thought this report was very well presented. A couple of things I wanted a little clarification on, please. Is this the report that goes into council having to establish a fund of money that residents, homeowners can tap into, like for window replacement and things like that, and then those dollars would be added on to their tax bills and paid out over an extended period of time? Am I correct? Or were we looking at something else in tonight's package?
Go ahead. And I believe she's talking about the SEEP program.
Through your worship to Councillor Hansard, that was one of the initiatives that we did some preliminary research on, and my understanding is that we would be coming back to you with more information regarding specifics on the program and the possibility of funding it, but that is something for a later date. This is really just touching on some of the initial research that's been done.
Okay, we're not being told we must do it if we embrace this policy, am I correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Hansard, that is correct.
Because that would be scary. I mean, windows alone in my house are $30,000. and I'm just multiplying that times all the older homes in Stony and thinking that's not even doable. One of the things that I think is valuable is being able to see where we've been and what's been accomplished and where we're headed. And I appreciated that very much in this report. I think I'll leave that at that for right now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for Councilor Hansford, and thank you, administration, for that. Again, the new action plan initiatives that was listed here for the Clean Energy Improvement Program is not a part of the approval. This is probably just approval for information only as an update. As mentioned on that page, this requires us, Town Council, adopting a bylaw before it's set up. So there's nothing that's being approved here besides accepting for information. Members of Council, any other questions, comments? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to administration for this report. I do have a few questions in regards to it, and then a comment. So first, turning to page 331, we talk about external initiatives, and then we list a number of groups that we work with and some of the initiatives that have come out of those groups. I'm just curious, because we are a member of the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance, and I'm curious why they're not on that, why they wouldn't be part of that list. And then while you're taking off your mask, I'll just tell you why, because I see further down on the page 341, one of the initiatives is a road salt management plan, and now sitting on that Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance, I know that they have some templates out, so I'm just curious if we are interacting with that group and getting all that we can out of some of the things that maybe they've already maybe spearheaded for us, or we could capitalize on. Go ahead.
Through your worship to the Deputy Mayor, my understanding is we have sat on that in the past. I don't know if we currently do. Maybe one of the other general managers will be able to elaborate on that, but I'm not aware that we are currently. Again, I know that the salt management plan was one of those, I believe, beyond action plan initiatives. So again, it was something at the time we didn't feel was within our means, or perhaps part of the 5-year or the 5-phase plan, but something that we'd be looking at as a potential to include into the 5-phase plan.
Okay, so currently Deputy Mayor Meyer sits on the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance. We have nobody sitting on the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. Yeah. So I appreciate bringing that forward, Deputy Mayor. If administration can reach out and touch base as the excuse me, as the Watershed Alliance sends out yearly reports, and as mentioned by the Deputy Mayor, there is a template for salt mitigation and registering on that. So instead of reinventing the wheel, let's take some of the work that's already been done by different organizations and then utilize that within our community.
Perfect, thank you. And then just another question. On page 331, where you also talk about the municipal energy manager, and kudos to scoring a grant to administration to fund that first year. I'm curious, moving forwards after that grant is being used up, do we have funding for that position in our corporate plan?
You treated Councilor Meyer, so that position would currently not be funded. It is 80% funded by grant and 20% by the administration. So we would be short the 80% that is grant funded at this time.
Okay, so the answer to the question was, in the year after the grant is complete, is there intentions to build the other 80% into the budget?
I guess speaking for the town manager, and he will supplement me if I'm wrong, that request to go in with other requests and corporate priorities would determine the recommended funding when the corporate plan comes forward.
Yeah, Your Worship, but I would just add, just to be clear too, at this point in time, it doesn't exist as a corporate initiative, I don't believe. Yeah.
Okay.
So short answer is no. It's not intended at this point to be beyond the grant
Thank you.
position.
And if I could just make a comment on that then. So moving forwards, I hope that we evaluate this new position, and before we do add it to a corporate thing, we have some administration input on whether we felt that we got value out of that or not. And then finally, just one comment, if I could.
Go ahead.
So somewhere in there, we do note the 53% diversion statistic. I would just like to temper that with some of my, I know it's anecdotal, but often out on the campaign trail, I often heard people say, well, I just take my garbage in and I drop it off at work. So when we talk about some of that diversion, I think we might be missing that portion of the picture of people who found alternatives themselves to deal with their garbage.
Okay, thanks for the comments, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I don't want to beat the topic to death, but on the Clean Energy Improvement Program, I just want to express my concern on investing time, resources, and energy into that. We've had looks at it. We've seen it before. In principle, it may be a good program, but there's a lot of things on the underside of it. So, I mean, I'm concerned about when we have all of these other initiatives in the plan that we could be dedicating time and resources to, and moving those forward and doing those. I am a little bit concerned about dedicating time and resources into investigating the Clean Energy Improvement Program and bringing that forward, particularly given that there are very few municipalities who currently have that in place. Again, it's just accepting the report at this point in time. It's work to be done, but I just want to make sure that I expressed that I'd rather see us putting the energy and effort into some of the other initiatives in the plan.
Okay. Okay, thanks for your comments, and I think I would kind of agree with those comments, but I do believe that staff will not be taking a lot of time to develop a policy or bylaw. There are, as you mentioned, a couple municipalities within the capital region that have already adopted one. We can take that policy and just bring it back to council to see if council, that's something that council wants to debate and look at, and it's an easy no or an easy yes or whatever. So I don't think in terms of time for our staff is considerable. It's more of our conversation with ourselves amongst the council and also with the community at large. Sticking to that topic, I do have a question regarding the program. If something does come back forward, in terms of the municipality front loading or fronting those costs for the next 25 to 30 years, are those dollars added to our debt limit?
Your Worship, I haven't done a lot of research on this program, but I would say if we borrow for it, yes. So that cash is going to have to come from somewhere. So it would either be our reserves or we would have to borrow, and it depends on how big the program wants to be. So we could look at, how those could be financed, and then council would need to prioritize if that's a high priority versus the other priorities.
Okay, definitely. If it does come forward, that's something that we'll be looking forward to make sure that it's not kind of taxing the resources that we currently have now to implement a program that might, again, push some financial hardships within the town of Stony and Plain. As everyone is aware, council self-imposed an 80% limit on the debt limit so that we can make sure that we're fiscally responsible for our residents. And having a program that, as Councillor Hanser mentioned, it could be millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, depending on how many people participate in this program. And if it's added to our debt limit, then that prevents the town of Stony and Plain from accomplishing its goals to build a better community. Any other questions, comments regarding the presentation? Councillor Hansen.
So, Mr. Mayor, did you just make that comment because you are suggesting that before the town spends a lot of time investigating that program, that maybe there's red flags going up that would say, we probably don't want to be part of that?
I think it was just a comment, as I said earlier, that there's other municipalities that are having passed bylaws that implement this program. It's just to bring one back and let the council look at it and then deliberate if we want to continue or not.
Okay, so at a later time, we would be making a decision as to whether we wanted to do it.
Sure, it could be definitely as part of a kind of a governance and priorities presentation. as administration seeks for direction, that could be directed at that time, or it can come back as a bylaw, and then and town council can vote it through or defeat it.
Okay. Because I mean, I've got other red flags on that, so I suppose those could be raised at the time, but these dollars do not go with the person who taps into them and gets work done on their home. They stay with the property, which means the dollars owing the town should be showing up on a title as a caveat, which means if somebody sells their home and thinks they're going to walk away with $60,000 or $100,000, they may have accumulated 50 on what they owe the town in taxes for this program, and so they're not going to walk away with that. Maybe they won't even make enough money in selling the home to clear the title, to hand it to the next owner. So I just think there's a whole ball of wax that comes with that. We need to be willing to say, I don't even know if we should be getting into this.
Yep, for sure, Councilor Hutchison. That's a conversation for council to have when that's brought forward to members of council to debate and to consider. Any more questions for clarity and understanding? I do have kind of a concern here. Looking at the report, very good report and presentation, I do have concern regarding one of the goals that we've done in terms of the status update on ongoing initiatives. I know this can't be correct. It says that we planted 18 new trees were planted in the South Ridge for Arbor Days. And it may be 18 trees, but when you read that, that sounds like that's all the trees that we planted within town Stony and Plain. But I know we also have a replacement program where we replace many trees through the subdivisions that currently have them, such as Westera. I know there's a few that's earmarked to be replaced because they've died off in Willow Park, in Folkestone. So the replacement is not just 18 trees. By reading this report, it sounds like that's all the town of Stony and Plain did was plant 18 trees. Does the administration have a number of trees we planted?
Your Worship, you are correct. We do replace other trees in the town. So the intention here was that was a special Arbor Day celebration, and those are the trees on that day. But we will correct in the future and highlight all the trees that were replaced. I can tell you that last year was a bad year for trees, and there was a lot of dead trees around, and the town has basically a 5-year program to try to catch up on some of those replacements. So we will include those in the future.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate that having that included because it does speak to our commitment to the environmental stewardship of our community. And reading this, if I read this and then have no knowledge of us replacing trees, I would just read this and think that the town only planted 18 trees for the whole year. Okay. Any more questions of clarity and understanding? Okay. See none. Councillor Loyens, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move the Town Council accept the environmental portfolio annual progress update for information.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Loyens. Members of Council, any questions and debate on the motion to accept for information? Again, we're not approving any of the projects or initiatives that are recommended here or just suggested. It's just a update for information. Debate? Okay, see none, call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that's accepted. Moving on to 9.2. It is 6:30, so let's take a recess before we go. I believe that's going to be a couple questions to be asked along the way during this presentation, so let's take a 10-minute recess and we'll come back. Okay, members of council, administration, welcome back to council meeting and continue on our agenda package 9.2. Recreational facility. Go ahead, general manager or town manager.
Your worship, members of council, there is a report included in the package. I did do a quick PowerPoint so that we could have some visuals and not just focus on the words. There we go. Okay, so this evening we're just going to quickly talk about a little bit about the history of the project and where we're currently at with the particular project. So if council recalls, and this is new for some of the new council members that are at the table tonight, back in 2017, the three municipalities, Parkland County and Spruce Grove, and ourselves did a indoor facility study, and we looked at the gaps and the future needs of recreation in the tri-municipal region. And that came out with a very robust report that indicated some of the facilities that we should be focusing on leading into 2018 and beyond. Council did accept that report as information, and also the city of Spruce Grove and Parkland County went through some of their own approvals related to that. With that, both the city of Spruce Grove and town of Stony Plain started looking at different facility potential developments in their communities. We looked at one that would, a conceptual design that would meet all of the recommendations within that particular report. And on the screen shows you a pictorial of what potentially could have happened related to the town of Stony Plain exercising all of those particular recommendations. Through that process, we looked at several phasing options around that. So on the screen this evening, basically that shows that we did identify a phase one of a dry sport facility. Phase two was an aquatic facility, and phase three was potential ice in the distant future. In relation to this, we've also created a recreation levy with our municipal developers, and the plan does also speak to these three phases as part of that levy process. With the phasing and the cost allocations, we had some conversation with council in 2019, 2020, and into 2021. Of course, we had a large pandemic that stalled a little bit of our work related to this particular project, but we're back on track with that. And council did ask administration to go back in the later stages of 2021 and look at three different construction types for a particular recreation facility, as the $25 million price tag on each of the three phases was not something that we were prepared to potentially go to, and we were looking for alternative construction types at that time. We were considering a tension membrane type facility, as some of those types of facilities have been built in Martinsville, Saskatchewan was one facility that we looked at, and the price allocation to that particular facility, the interior met our needs, and the cost was substantially different than the traditional construction that we're used to seeing. So we did go away and look at the three different construction types, and this evening that's what the bulk of the report will be speaking about. So we did engage BR2 Architecture to assist us with this evaluation. These were the high-level evaluation criteria that we did look at. We did look at 23 to 26 different types of criteria, and these are the larger ones that typically people will look at when they're evaluating the different types of construction methodologies. Then we also put it down to about a handful of different evaluation tools in order for us to come up with a recommendation for council. So as you can see, time to construct is a big one. The maintenance of the building overall, the R values, how you add or not to a particular building, the life cycle of the building, so the materials that it's constructed of, what do you have to do related to that in order to keep the building in good shape? Can you modify? So a lot of buildings, you can't modify the width or the length of the building. It just comes as a particular package, so that sometimes that provides some restrictions. related to what you're trying to achieve from our program objectives. And of course, vandalism and sometimes snow and ice control does play a bit of a role, and I'll talk about that a little briefly in the coming slides here. So this chart is actually in the report. Might be easier for you to see in the report. Sorry, I don't have the page reference. But essentially what we did here was we took the different categories. We evaluated conventional construction, pre-engineered construction, and tension membrane construction. So in one chart, I wanted to provide council with a high level. These are the differences between each of those three methodologies based on the categories on the left-hand side. So very quickly going through the time to construct, when you look at each of the three categories, the conventional certainly does take a little bit more time to construct as the materials do come to site. And as they come to site and are procured and ready to be utilized, that's when they start to be applied to the building construction versus the pre-engineered and the tension membrane. Typically, it's almost like a Lego package. You get everything in a couple packages, it comes, and you erect it, and it's fairly quick, a quick erection process. With the pre-eng and the tension membrane, the exterior goes up very quickly, and then you work with probably more conventional type construction on the interior of the building. Additional expansions, as you can see in the three different categories, each of them have the opportunity to do so. As you move from conventional to tension membrane, it becomes less, or there are more restrictions to add. The tension membrane, basically you're building a new building essentially in order to add to that particular type of construction, or you have to use a conventional or a pre-eng to join the two different buildings together, versus the pre-eng and the conventional. Often in your planning design process, you can ensure that another building connecting to the original certainly is built into the process. R values, you can see through the three that overall there's not a lot of difference in the R value in terms of the building. The tension membrane does lose some R value when you cut into the side of the building, and that's fairly typical. You can't design, it's a specified fabric, and there's only so much you can do in order to eliminate that R value loss. However, depending on the size of that break, often the R value does not decrease that often. Sorry, does not decrease that low. Life cycle, we did look at a 45-year lifespan for the facilities when we did our evaluation. As you can see with the conventional, a lot of the materials that are used in that type of construction, you're looking at 40+ years in terms of life. When you get into the pre-engineered, it drops down slightly, and then the tension membrane is under 20 years. The only reason it's under 20 years is because the exterior skin on a tension membrane, which is critical to the structure, it does have a replacement cycle that one has to consider when they're building that type of facility. I believe the manufacturer guarantees it in that 15 to 20 year range, and then you definitely have to start considering taking that off and replacing it. So that would drive that overall capital life cycle cost higher than the other two. Proprietary, so with the conventional, often when you're building an air handling system, as an example, it goes into a conventional building. You don't really have to worry about replacing it with something that is not like the one that you took out, or tile or other pieces like that, or structural steel. Pre-engineered, a little bit along the same line with that. With the tension membrane, the manufacturer that puts up that specific building, you would have to go back to them for the parts and pieces that would be dealing with the structure related to that particular type of construction. From a capital cost perspective, certainly did mention this earlier, tension membrane does come in slightly lower than the other two when it comes to the overall capital for the shell. The pre-eng would be your next level of cost, and then your most expensive cost would be the conventional type of construction. Structural modifications to each of these three buildings, three types, of construction. Often with conventional, you can design there's very limited limitations on the design. With the pre-eng, again, typically it's like a garage package from Co-op. It's X size, the rafters come, the siding comes, and if you want to do something beyond that, then you have to start looking at different pieces if it's not part of the pre-design. And with the tension membrane, certainly there's a limitation to what can be done related to the type of structural components related to that particular type of construction type. So with this, it's just a quick graphic to look at the 5 higher areas of construction evaluation that we did. If you look at it, the tension membrane and the conventional, so the TM and the CV, you can see that the rocks interchange throughout each of these 5, whereas the pre-engineered type construction stays pretty much in the middle. So it's a very good product that will provide and give you a good outcome, and it really stays fairly neutral when it comes to the challenges or the advantages of that type of construction. Certainly you see the rocks between the TM and the CV are definitely interchanging more often than the pre-eng. Basically, this is just a quick visual of what we just went through on the larger chart. So this is a bit of a return on investment in terms of that 45-year capital cost. So you can see the gray line, which has the 2 larger humps. That is your tension fabric. So that at year 15, 20, it have to replace the outer shell. So that's what drives that capital cost. The red line is the pre-eng building. So you can see it's a very gradual and slight increase. And with the conventional, there are some things like roofs and siding, depending on the type of product that you would use on those particular types of masonry or those types of construction types. That would slightly at year 29, 30, 40 year, you'd start to see some larger capital requirements come into the overall building life cycle. Just getting into some of the costs related to this. So again, from a cost perspective, this is at the design phase in terms of we have a vision, we have a thought, and we have a generalized program that we'd like to put into this particular building based on 50,000 square feet. Once we get into detailed design and we start to solidify the types of programs and the spatial allocations, then there'll be another level of costing related to that. And then, of course, as we continue to design the particular building, there's several jumping off points that we can bring cost allocation back to council for a conversation. And of course, the ultimate, and knowing what the overall facility cost will be is when we put it out to tender and we actually have people bid on the project. So from a tension membrane, this is based again on a 50,000 square foot building. You can see that the building construction is in that $12.5 to $13.5 million range, and that includes the interior. We are carrying a cost of about $850,000 to prepare the site for the type of construction that we would put. So that's preparing the land, hardscaping, all the anchor points that we'd have to do for a particular building. So this facility basically comes into about just over $13 million to just over $14 million in overall cost for a projection. When we get into pre-engineered, again, looking at the construction, so you're in that $13 to $14 million range for the building overall, the $850. So you can see that this has increased by $500,000 to $750,000 over the pre-eng building. The tension membrane building. Then getting into the conventional, and just to reference, council, the pictures behind are referencing a pre-eng building, a conventional building, and a tension membrane. You can see that the construction price then again does jump up. So now you're getting into the higher to mid 13 million to again higher mid 14, and then we're into the just under over 14 million to just over 15 million for an estimated cost. And the reason we put a range in there, the range is indicative of what happens inside the building and what types of finishes you might put in a particular building. So just comparing the three costs again on a 50,000 square foot building, you can see how the tension membrane tracks is the lower and the pre-eng in the middle and the conventional on the upper end of the overall cost escalation. Again, just for council, we are looking at the Glen Hall site, and so this pictorial shows the big black on the top, my right-hand side of the picture shows the Glen Hall Arena roof. So this essentially is showing what a new recreation facility might look like on the Glen Hall site. We're including the lands that the new Stony Plains Central as part of the Glen Hall site. So this is just basically showing if we were to lay out a recreation facility of about 50,000 square feet. This one does include the curling club. And I believe this one also does show an aquatic facility, so the two different phases plus the curling club. Maintains our sport fields, adds some parking. So we're recommending that any facility that we do develop at the Glen Hall site, we're suggesting to council that the Westlands is the most ideal location for that particular facility to be constructed. A couple reasons for that the Westlands is the next area for our residential development. We do have the school site fairly close proximity to that. The development of 57th and the extension into Brickyard provides a couple of different access points. And again, this is just an overview of the site, but we would consider some access off of the existing Glen Hall site into the new recreation site. So there's a couple different ways in which people can get to. Also, the 57th and the Brickyard do come in on major arteries into our community, so visitors from around the region have the opportunity to get to this facility fairly quickly without having to go through substantial residential areas. Moving forward with the project schedule, so in 2022, we will be doing targeted stakeholder engagement. So targeted means the program is a dry sport facility, so looking at those that would potentially be using it from a dry sport perspective, and looking at those user groups. We do have the outdoor user groups that would be impacted by a design, an indoor facility design, so we would be speaking with the outdoor field users. We are aiming to complete the design by Q4 into Q1 next year, and then come back to council with a construction decision. So at this point, council has authorized us to do the detailed design of the building. There still is a construction decision that council has to make prior to us going to tender and prior to us starting or commencing any construction. Our corporate plan does include dollar values related to going to construction in 2023, 2024, but that again, council has to make that decision. That's not been authorized at this point. So once the design's done and we continue down that spectrum and understand costs, we will be having another conversation with council related to the construction cost of the overall project. That's a quick summary of the report and where we're currently at, and happy to answer some questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Okay, I'll start off. Definitely this whole concept and design has come out of the 2009 and then 2017 updated indoor recreational study. Has our regional partners been provided this information?
Your worship, through to yourself and members of council, certainly we have had a couple conversations with our regional partners, both Parkland County and the city of Spruce Grove. They are well aware of these plans and the town of Stony Plains' strategic priority to have this facility constructed in our community.
Okay, let me rephrase that. So if administration has been notified, has the respective councils been shared with this presentation and notified of the options?
Your worship, and I'll allow the the CAO to supplement, but certainly we've had two sessions, one with the city of Spruce Grove, and we also had a dual regional session with both councils in attendance and showed them our plans to move forward with this particular project. So I would suggest, yes, they're quite aware of this particular project.
Okay. Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation tonight. I have two kind of key questions. The first one, we've talked a lot to date about the construction of this facility. We've talked a lot about the design of the facility. We haven't talked a lot about the operations of this facility. And part of the conversation and part of, as we start to get towards the final decision for construction, is going to be understanding the operations of the facility and what kind of impacts that's going to have. When will council start receiving information in regards to operating model options and what potential costs those will incur? Obviously, we know that municipal recreation facilities typically do not run at a cost recovery. They come with a deficit that has to be funded from the tax base. So, that's going to be a huge consideration, because not only are we going to have a debenture, but we're also going to have a significant change in operating. So when will we start to see some of those models, and will it be in time to consider that as we move forward on a decision on construction?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie. Certainly, when we come to council with the cost the cost estimations, as we move through the several phases, the operational impacts will become more clear to us in terms of the program level, the size of the building, what it would take for us to operate that particular building. So at that time, when we come forward to council with respect to decisions to move to construction, we would certainly have that operational impact also as part of that overall conversation. In the corporate plan, we have carried some dollars to support the operation of the facility for 1 quarter of operating. And I think that's when our corporate plan ends. So the next iteration of our corporate plan would have included a full year of operating at a particular estimated deficit. So as that design becomes more clear to us and more defined, we're able to come back with better operating dollar numbers for you, so that conversation is a larger conversation, not just construction, but also the operational impact on an annual basis.
So safe to say Q1 2023, when we see the complete design, we should also have a relatively good understanding of our operating model and what the potential deficits on that are.
Correct.
Excellent. And second question, through your worship. Council had mentioned and had asked for some investigation into options in regards to our current outdoor pool and potential seasonal expansions, operating expansions on that in the interim, knowing that we are looking at a phased design of the recreation center, and aquatics is not included in that phase until further down the road. When will council see more information in chambers in regards to the potential options that exist for that?
Your Worship, through the Councillor Laurie. So again, we have BR2 looking into that information for us at this point. We have separated those two as two separate conversations with council, so that they're not tied together as one conversation. End of Q2 is when we're proposing to bring information back to council on that particular topic.
Excellent. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through to administration. I'm looking in page 367 of 377, and I'm going to refer to the new site that you're proposing. All the way through this, we've looked at a tie-in to the Glen Hall Arena. What I see today is a complete new site where it separates the Glen Hall Arena from the new recreation facility. How might you suggest that as we move forward, because even I see as the future arena is not tied into this standalone building, how might I see this being tied in completely as a multiplex facility?
Okay, sorry, I thought you might have another question. Your Worship, through the Councillor Plechko. So thank you. We do believe that the Glen Hall has a life expectancy. Tying the whole facility to the Glen Hall, we were a bit mindful of that in terms of we didn't want the potential demo of a building to impact the operational of a brand new building. I think the picture is the site is a little bit, it doesn't provide a good visual in terms of there's an opportunity for us to connect the Going to the arena is different than going to the larger site. If this particular building is sited properly, there's probably an opportunity for us to add future ice onto the new building also. Right now, we're only showing you the 2 phases, and as it relates right now to this, we are continuing to look at how the building will fit on this particular parcel. This is just a very quick illustration as to why we would recommend it to go to the west. But certainly, we are considering all 3 phases being part of our larger building. Site restrictions, of course, would limit that opportunity for us. So as you're aware of this particular site, there's a 5-meter difference between where the school is currently being built to where the Glen Hall Arena sits. So that's a bit of a construction consideration that we have to look at when we're looking at a building of this size, or a building that would accommodate 3 separate phases with 3 separate distinct activities that we would include in that larger overall building once phase 3 was built out. But certainly it is something that we're considering in terms of the ability for all 3 phases to be located and attached to one building on a single site. It's just there are some site limitations there that we're currently reviewing.
Thank you. So in addition to that, as I look at the new site that you have proposed, I also see a very fancy road that sits beside it that we chose to end at a school because of a cost associated with that. When we're looking at a $15 million recreation facility, an argument of about $1 million between different structures. Have we considered the impact of the debt as well that will go along with a road that's not built that we will need to build if a developer decides not to do it at this current time?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Plechko, currently with planning and infrastructure, we are working on the site servicing and some of the impacts of that site servicing related to this entire area, not just the recreation facility, but the entire Old Town South area. Some of those requirements and implications and impacts certainly are becoming more clear as we continue down that path. And again, as we continue down the development of this particular facility and that particular site, again, we'll be providing council with more knowledge or understanding as to what those cost impacts are related to that.
Anything else, Councillor Plechko?
Does that answer your question, Councillor Plechko?
As close as you can get, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? So, Mr. Chair, this is coming back as the accept for information as we continue to move down the process. Can you throw back the timelines, please? Okay. So in terms of the QT, targeted shareholder engagement, I was going to ask about what does that entitle or encompass? Because we've already done this back in 2009, then redid it in 2017, and we still haven't built anything in this whole region. So what are we targeting shareholders engagement for again?
Yeah. Your Worship, good question. So often when you're doing a facility of this nature, you'll go out to the community and you'll say, what would you like to see in this? And they'll give you a list of things. And then we'll go back in. One of them is a soccer facility. Excuse me. So you'll talk, a targeted engagement would be speaking specifically to soccer to say, what size should the dressing rooms be? How many should we have? What type of board system? What type of field system? What type of grass? Pickleball is an example. If they're being considered as part of the indoor group, would you like dedicated courts? Are you okay with a bunch of lines painted on the ground and it facilitates that process? What kind of dressing room, spectator, those types of things. So when we talk about targeted, it's having more direct conversation with those that would be impacted and using the facility most often, and ensuring that the needs of those particular target groups can be accommodated as much as possible. Again, we have to keep costs in mind when we go through some of these conversations, but certainly if I use a hockey rink as an example, in my career we've built a hockey rink with, it was called a practice facility, and it really didn't have dressing rooms, and it didn't have a lot of things. It was basically built to host hockey games. It wasn't really practical in terms of a long-term use of that particular facility. Eventually, our community had to go through a sizable upgrade to that particular facility to add dressing rooms and make it a competition facility. It was built for the purpose of an Arctic Winter Games event, and it was done very, very bare bones in order for that event to host it in the community, but we didn't go and engage with the particular users to find out what should we be putting in this particular arena to ensure that 15 to 20 years from now, you can still use this facility well. So those are the types of things that you would directly ask a targeted stakeholder in relation to, in comparison to the larger that we did at the TLC when we talked about, would you like to see an aquatic facility here? Yeah, we'd love to see one. Well, then the swim club might let us know directly what they might like to see in that particular facility or something that we should consider in the design of that particular facility.
Okay. So from my understanding, so the targeted stakeholder engagement would be for users of the field house, double gymnasium, et cetera, which is part of kind of the first phase that's been presented to members of council.
That's correct.
Okay. And in terms of targeted engagement, where does the Westridge Curling Club fit into this timeline?
Your Worship, and through the rest of council, so certainly we're keeping in close contact with the Westridge Curling Club. They believe they'll have some assurances on their insurance by the end of this month, which will allow us to have a dialogue with them in terms of what our next steps are. So I guess very simply, there's a cost impact to a curling club, and they have some desires as to what type of curling club they would like to replace the old one with. We have some rough numbers in our own minds with respect to what that might entail. Really to have a great conversation with them about if there's a gap or if it's fully funded. We have to wait for that conclusion of their insurance process to be undertaken. Certainly the club is very interested in partnering with us and in being part of our larger facility. We're definitely interested in having them as part of that facility, as I think it's a really good relationship and provides some advantages to both of us. One from a space use of that particular site. So I think there's more to come on that. We're certainly partnered up and well geared to work with each other if things line up well, and we'll know more by the end of the month related to that relationship.
Okay. Sounds good. So going back to Councillor Pletcho's question regarding 367, in terms of the recreational center where it's kind of earmarked right now in white, I think you mentioned that it does have the ability to add the Westridge Curling Center if they desire, and then also phase 2, which is the aquatic center. And I understand that with the future expansion of the rink, and you mentioned that the Glen Hall has a life expectancy. It is currently older than myself right now, and I'm starting to fall apart. So I can only imagine what's happening with the arena over the course of time. But there is that elevation gap. So in terms of having that develop in different phases, did you say that there's a possibility to connect those two parts through a vestibule or through a walkway as a type from, because there is an elevation gap from where the current rink is, and even to the west side of that, to where the proposed recreational center is?
Your Worship, through to yourself and the rest of the council, certainly we've looked at a few designs which would have a drive lane or trail connectivity to even connect up into the ball diamonds and into the spray park and pool. We do recognize that people currently are used to accessing that site from 52nd, so and the traditional way of entering into Glen Hall. And we think it's important that we still maintain that access. So any facility that we would build in the bottom, we would try and ensure that there is some sort of road connectivity between the existing site and the potential new site, so that it could be accessed from both the 57th and Brickyard Drive, and also the Old Town direction. So certainly it would be a hard surface of some sort, whether it be a drive lane, whether it be a walk lane. We do understand that uses of facilities require gear to be moved back and forth, so we certainly wouldn't limit it to just walking a great distance from the main parking lot up to a hockey rink would ensure that you're able to drive your vehicle up there so that your gear would follow you.
Okay. It doesn't show here on the diagram that's here on 367, but currently there is I guess you can call that an emergency exit out of Brickyard. In terms of that, is that a road dedication right away, or is that just a ER right away?
Your Worship, I'm not sure about that. We could certainly look into that and give you the right designation. On some of the design concepts that we've looked at, we've certainly utilized that particular roadway as an opportunity for access. So you're right, currently it is an emergency access for the Brickyard. But I believe unless... So we would confirm that with you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Mayor's question. Council, any more questions for clear understanding? Okay, see none. Thank you for the presentation. Council Pledgeko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council accept the recreation facility project update for information.
Okay, thank you. Members of Council, any questions in the debate on the motion to accept for information? Again, this is not debating about the design or where it's located, it's just for information. Councilor Pledgeko, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just one more question to administration. For your recommendation, you recommend that you be able to look at all types of the construction phases. What additional cost is there to having three designs based on what's there? What does that additional cost look like? And would there be a cost savings if we chose to go after one specific build?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Pledgeko. I think what was evident with us when we went through the evaluation was there are some advantages and disadvantages to each of the three. The overall cost on a project of that size, we believe there's a material difference between all three costs, which provides us the opportunity to be more flexible with the design that we may choose. Also in the report, we talked about precast concrete. That wasn't something that we evaluated. However, the architect is well aware of different design elements that might provide us cost efficiencies and cost gains. If we were to pick one as an example that reduces our opportunity to potentially look at a cost gain because we're not able to be flexible with the design element that might work best to be pre-eng, it might work best to have conventional. I'm not sure that it would work best to be tension membrane because there are a lot of restrictions around that from a program objective achievement. But certainly it's a consideration. If they came back to us and said, this is your most cost effective, provide you the best opportunity and the best dollar value, and not restrict them with saying, please build it specifically with this. So I think we would probably achieve more cost savings by being flexible on our design versus being prescriptive on our design.
Your Worship, if I can maybe ask the General Manager to comment on, is there a tipping point where you would be back to speak with Council about which design we would go with? And, along that line, if you could comment on, would that be a price decision or would that be, just a flexibility of design and operation decision?
Certainly, Mr. CAO. Definitely, that's a decent question. In terms of, we do have some jumping off points. Right now, we haven't decided what particular design type or construction type that we're going to be using. I believe the architect would have the opportunity fairly quickly within the design to say, this is the type of construction that's going to work best and achieve the most program outcome for you. And here's where it's trending from a cost perspective. So at that 30% design drawn, easy to come to council and say, here's where the costs, and again, please keep in mind that 30% design completion, there's still 70% of the building to be drawn, but we certainly would be able to trend or provide council with a trend as to which way the costing might be going, whether it's on track, lower, or above what we're projecting in terms of the overall project target of $15 million. So I think at that point, with some cost consulting completed as the design moves along, that would provide us more surety that that $15 million capital cost that we're trying to achieve is either being met or not, which allows us to come back to council and say, here's the design, here's all the benefits around this design and this construction. We want to continue on. However, this is the cost implication, and we would provide recommendations to council. And at that point, you might be coming back to us saying, no, it's this much. Do what you need to do in order to cut costs on the budget to achieve that $15 million budget mark. So I think there's opportunities for us to come forward to council and provide you with updates on where we're trending from an overall project value perspective and what we might need to do to mitigate any escalations in costs or adjust the design to meet the achieved cost of $15 million that we've been discussing.
Yeah. So I might ask a question a little bit different then. So when we look at the three up there, there's a difference between conventional, pre-engineered, and membrane structure of about 20 years expected life expectancy. When I look at the total value to build the building, we're about $1 million difference overall. When we look at the total project, and correct me if I'm wrong, are we looking at a comparison of 40 years at the 14 million opposed to the 15 million? Or are you saying that it's a $14 million project and in 20 years we're going to have to expect to do something different at that point in time? Because if it's a $14 million project that's only good for 20 years and we have a $4 million add to it, would we not consider something that's more conventional? But if we're looking at everything that's timeline 40 years, and it's a $14 million project, and it's a $15 million project for conventional. I understand that you want to be able to do different things. That debenture borrowing is only $1 million, which is a small portion of what it is over a period of time.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Pletchko, if I understand the question correctly, I guess as an administrator, I would probably steer you away from a tension membrane facility then, if I understand your question correctly, because you're certainly going to have to pay a higher capital cost for that building over 45 years than you are pre-engine conventional. That being said, there's still some advantage to considering that type of construction. So, and you're correct, the $1 million debentured over a number of years, it's not huge when you're talking about a mortgage payment. We're essentially saying, I think, the same thing in terms of we don't see a difference capital-wise between the three, and we want the ability for the architect to go back and have that design flexibility and that design opportunity to be innovative and look at other things that we may not have even looked at and reviewed when it comes to construction type. Precast concrete is an example. They probably wouldn't provide that option for a pool because it's a very corrosive environment and that might not be the right application, where conventional is the right application because it's a corrosive environment and that's the best construction type for that particular type of facility that we might develop. Dry sport, where you're just looking at circulating air and making sure that air balance is correct. We've got some pretty flexible options there related to design. So I think we're going to see innovation. We're going to see opportunity for the architect to go and to me, the pressure point is 15 million is the target. We need to design a building that's going to achieve this level of program opportunity for our community, and it can't cost more than 15 million bucks. So now they have to go out and find that best construction strategy to meet that end outcome. Versus right now, we don't really have a budget. in converse, if we didn't have a budget of 15 million, they would probably come back and design us a 23 or 30 million dollar building. Or maybe not, because based on the targeted stakeholder engagement, we might be building a $15 million building, of which we thought it was going to take us $30 or $40 million to build. So again, we're at the conceptual stage. We're putting some numbers out there. We believe we can achieve a building that you've asked us to build within that $50 million range, give or take a couple $100,000. As we get more and more along the design spectrum, we'll be able to confirm that 100% with you.
Thank you.
I'll add to that line of questioning, because when I was reading this, definitely in terms of the three design concepts that they're presented, the tension membrane seems to be the least amount of cost, but the most for capital replacement. So in the longer term, more dollars in the future versus more dollars at the beginning. And you also mentioned a fabricated or prefab concrete building. So the way that I'm looking at this on page 365, we're definitely pre-engineered is probably the balanced approach. Conventional, which is, as mentioned by Councillor Plechko, is only about maximum $700,000 more based on the design numbers that you have right now for longer life expectancy, less overall maintenance in the meantime. Can we not just not focus on the tension membrane and then add prefab concrete to that to see how that makes a difference? Because if reading this report, I don't know what's going to happen when you guys come back to us after you guys have done your targeted engagement. I can't see myself approving a tension membrane in terms of saving a few dollars now to cost me $30 million, like it says right here, every 15 minutes we need a structural capital every 15 years.
So, Your Worship, yes, that's essentially what the report was indicating, and we had to provide this information to you, and it was a good exercise for ourselves to go through to understand the differences between all of them. There's other limitations with tension membrane in terms of it can only be so high, it can only be so wide, which means you basically have to build a building within a building when you're using that type of construction methodology. So is it the best for this particular project? It probably works, but is it the best? It's not the best. But we have to look at the cost. There's a financial factor there, and it certainly was something that we enjoyed looking at, and it gave us all an opportunity to understand the limitations and some of the advantages a little bit more. I think you would still have a nice facility if you went with tension membrane, but I think because we're looking at the overall cost implications, I don't think tension membrane came across as a clear-cut winner and the only thing that we should be considering in the development of this particular facility. So I think we do have some gains with respect to being able to consider conventional and pre-eng when we're doing this particular type of facility. And likely the tension membrane has probably worked itself out of the conversation when it comes to an overall design consideration.
Okay, thank you for that comments. And I definitely agree with Councilor Plechko's comments. Is like, if it's going to save us money, don't waste your time chasing down a design concept that probably would not be suitable for our climate or be approved by council. Okay. Any other questions, comments? No. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay. That's carried. Thank you. Move on to 9.3, the Cultural Roundtable Citizens at Large appointments. Go ahead, administration.
Your Worship, nothing really to add other than the lead sheet submitted, that there was some vacancies in the Cultural Roundtable, and they have appointed or recommending this appointment for council.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor with the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council appoint Perry Stelter to the Cultural Roundtable.
Okay, members of council, any questions or comments regarding that appointment? I believe that's the recommendation from the cultural roundtable, so I do not see any issues myself. Any other members of council? Okay, see none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Thank you. Members of council, that ends our business items. So moving on to council information and council discussion. Deputy Mayor, you're first.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very briefly, I would just like to thank the organizers of the Moosehide Walk that we had this past week. Good opportunity, plenty of wise words spoken at that event. I would just make note that we held ours locally despite the national one being canceled. So kudos to Stony Plain pushing through and doing it regardless. And then also I would just like to announce the Stony Plain Library has been out searching for a new library director with our old one moving on. So we're happy to have Rob McClure, joining us, and but he won't be starting with us till around April 25th. So exciting news coming out of the library.
Okay. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Fletchko.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hansard.
Mr. Mayor, I went to the opening, not the grand opening. You're going to speak at the grand opening later this year, I believe, for the new vintage store that the Multicultural Center has opened, and the Perk Building, and I was absolutely surprised at what a beautiful facility they've created there. Vintage clothing and other items, and they had a lovely Valentine's Day theme opening, and lots of members of the public were popping by. So never downplay the power of portable signs. And they were very, very pleased to have this open. So I encourage council and any members of the public listening tonight to pop into the Perk Building and check out the new vintage store.
Thank you, Councillor Hansard, for that invite. Anything else? No. Councillor Loynes.
Nothing this evening.
Councillor Anderson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we won't be meeting in chambers until February 28th, just wanted to bring attention to Canada's Anti-Bullying Day, recognized February 23rd, in conjunction with Pink Shirt Day here in Western Canada. It's a globally recognized initiative to bring awareness to the physical, mental, and emotional effects of bullying. Our diversity is becoming more visible than ever. And I think we're all learning to embrace our cultures, identities, and true selves in more open and direct ways, which makes the need to lift each other up with acceptance and respect and inclusion so important. And so I just want to invite council, administration, residents of our community, take a stand against bullying, become an advocate for kindness and inclusivity by wearing a pink shirt on February 23rd. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just a couple of quick things this evening. Yeah, it was great to attend the Moosehide Walk with our Elder Wilson Bearhead, giving us a little bit of a history on that. Again, it's a campaign to stand up against violence towards women and children, particularly Indigenous women and children, the missing and murdered Indigenous women. The national event has been postponed, so it wasn't canceled, so they are still having it. Stony Plain did choose to go ahead and have our walk on the actual National Day of Recognition, which was publicized by the national campaign as well, so they were still very supportive of that. Very interesting to see our census data that came out. It's great to see those numbers. Stony Plain grew 4.7% over the last 5 years. The average in the Edmonton metropolitan region was 9.15%, so we're a little bit behind there, but certainly think we have a lot going for us over the next little while that will help us come even on the next census data release. had a great meeting this morning with most of council, with Minister McIver and MLA Turton, who were able to give a great tour to the minister of our brand new library facility and our new downtown. So it was great, always great to have opportunities to showcase our community to ministers and our MLA. So thank you very much for that. One question this evening for the General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure. We received an email earlier today stating that they were going to be doing some work on the outdoor rinks and that they were attempting to have them open again today. But then this afternoon we received a news release from the town stating that I believe it's essentially all of the outdoor skating surfaces are now closed for the season. Just wondering which it is. Are we closed for the season on February 14th, or are we going to endeavor to try and get those open again?
Your Worship, there were some, apologies, there were some challenges with some of the rinks, so we're still trying to work through it, and I'll report back more information tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much. That is, that is it for me this evening. Thank you, Your Worship.
All right, thank you, members of council. And again, just before we close off here, just a reminder that February 21st is Family Day. So it is a day that has been a Alberta holiday for quite some time. And it's the day that if you like to go fishing, you don't need a fishing license to fish at any of the Alberta lakes. So definitely if you have that itching or inclination to go fishing, find somebody that'll take you. You don't need a license. So definitely take that time to enjoy some time with your friends and loved ones. As well as February 22nd is the throne speech and also the budget. I'll be looking forward to seeing what's happening out of there because, as we know, we are at the mercy of the provincial government. We are a child of the provincial government, so we are regulated through the Municipal Government Act. So everything that's in that budget kind of trickles down to us as municipalities and how we can offer the services to our residents. So I'll be looking forward to that, and members of council, keep your ear open. We may need to advocate for certain issues and things in our community that has been, again, dropped off or left off the budget for the next couple of years. And with that, there's no closed meeting, so we are adjourned. And today is Valentine's Day, so I'd like to just say love is love, and let's enjoy the evening.